I think that local people remember the 60s as the time when that old music hall joke about smoky Stoke was finally laid to rest. At last, Stoke arrived on the national map. Whether it was a combination of things. It was probably things like the Victoria Theatre arriving on the scene, all the greenery that we suddenly saw around in place of the smoke, the ending of the bottle ovens, all that smoke suddenly disappeared. Things like Radio Stoke, Stanley Matthews, we can't forget old Stan, of course, Arnold Bennett centenary, the focus on Arnold Bennett, and of course the burgeoning nightlife which occurred in that era. The place, I remember, which eventually had, I think, 56,000 members up in Bryan Street at an old warehouse there. Incredibly successful venture that, by two young men from Manchester. And that really put Stoke on the nightlife. Now, can you imagine it? People coming from Manchester and Liverpool to Stoke for a night out. And that all happened in the 60s.
Burslem is known as the mother town of the potteries.
Yes, and we've got our bit of history too, with names like Arnold Bennett, Josiah Wedgwood and Sir Oliver Lodge. But perhaps the most unexpected thing is that we've got two town halls. This one, the first, was affected by mining subsidence and it's now the public gallery. The second one was finished in 1911 after a race against time to get it built for the Federation. You see, in those days, the people of Burslem hoped that their new public building would give the town a higher status. But Burslem was not chosen to be the city centre after all. That honour fell to Stoke-upon-Trent. But what we may have missed in 1911, we're certainly not overlooking in 1960, because we're getting ready for a foretaste of the Stoke-on-Trent of tomorrow. With new fronts to our shops and clean paint, it won't be Arnold Bennett's Bursley anymore. This is the site of what's going to be our new town square. It should be a picture in May with trees in the street and a bandstand in the public gardens.
Well, this used to be the site of the Shambles, which was the meat market in Bennett's day. And Bennett thought it was one of the most wonderful buildings in this area. He was very, very fond of it. And I think he'd be very sad that it was knocked down, even to create a little area of greenery in the middle of Burslem, and even to put up a plaque to himself to create the space for a plaque. I think he would still be rather sad that it had gone.
I think we've come a long way since the Federation. Arnold Bennett may have put our character into his books, but the voice of today belongs to people like the president of the Burslem Chamber of Trade, Mr. George Salt.
Yes, but I think there's still a great deal to be done to make it a really fine city. We are developing well, but I think that we must retain the individual characteristics of the 6 towns.
So these are the chains of office of the respective townships before Federation. And beginning with the northern end of the city, Tunstall was an urban district council, and this was their chairman's chain. Burslem was a borough, and this was their mayoral chain. Stoke-upon-Trent, which was one of the townships in Stoke-on-Trent, this was their mayoral chain, and before Federation it had this medallion on it. And then Longton was a borough, and this was their mayoral chain. And the new medallion on the old Stoke-upon-Trent chain incorporates the separate or salient features of the respective townships. And now I would like you to look at the finest piece of pottery in the world, the Queen's vase. This vase was made to commemorate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. 3 remained in this country. One the Queen has, one is at Federation House, the home of the potters, and the other is here in the Lord Mayor's parlour in the city of Stoke-on-Trent.
Anyone who's interested in football will remember the 60s as the Stanley Matthews era, or the second Stanley Matthews era. And this was really the stuff of legends. Stan coming back in 1961 at the age of 45 or whatever he was, and 35,000 people turning out to see him play in the first match in a second division game when he came back home, about 5 times the normal gate at Stoke. And then the whole era of Tony Waddington and those old stars like Jimmy McElroy and Dennis Viollet and Jackie Moody and Stan himself, of course, all suddenly clicking together, and it all worked, and they were great entertainers, and all of a sudden Stoke were the team to watch. And then in 63 they went up to the first division and Stan took them there. And one match I'll never forget was the final home game against Luton Town, when they clinched the second division championship. And Stan scored the second goal in a 2-0 victory. And the way he took that goal for a man of 46 or whatever he was unbelievable, just like a young centre forward. Jimmy McElroy picked up the ball just inside the Stoke half, and this long raking pass down the right wing towards Stan, which he picked up and passed a couple of men in a trice, just like he was in the old days in the 30s, and drove the goalkeeper, ran round the goalkeeper and planted it at the corner of the net. And the crowd, of course, went absolutely berserk, and that was the end of the championship clinched, and Stan was the man who did it.
We arrived at the old Vic, where we're now standing, after a long adventure trying to build a new theatre in the round in Newcastle under Lyme. And when that scheme fell through due to an early government credit squeeze, we looked around for buildings we could convert, and we found this one, and it came, as it were, on the market, and we managed to secure the lease. But it was attractive because it was particularly wide. What you can see behind you is the kind of proscenium arch that framed the screen of the old cinema, but it's got quite a complicated roof truss, and whereas a lot of this period of suburban cinemas were long and narrow sheds, this was getting a bit more sophisticated and was very broad, so you could build a central stage with more or less even seating around it. So of all the options we had at that time for the survival of a touring company, this was, apart from Leeds, the last conurbation in the country that had no resident repertory theatre, the Potteries of Newcastle, and the building could be converted to seat about 350, which seemed a reasonable number for us to kind of pay our way, with subsidy, of course, and opened on October the 9th, 1962, after spending something like £5,000 cash on converting it. It's an astonishing figure now, but that's what we did. Free seats and some donations, but that's how we did it.
Michelin X with its bracing of steel wire. Michelin X is the safety tire. Michelin X help you every time you brake. Michelin X make it safe to overtake. Turning corners is done with ease by fitting tires as stable as these. On bumpy roads they comfortably flex. On treacherous roads trust Michelin X. Michelin X help you steer more accurately. Michelin X give you more miles definitely. time that you take a bend, on your Michelin X you can depend. Every tire is stabilized with steel. That means more safety is on every wheel. Whether your car is very large or just quite small, Michelin X, you will find them best of all. Michelin X.
And there was this burgeoning nightlife. Places like the place was the inn place of the 60s, opened in 1962. I always remember I went there on the opening night in 1962, and there were only about a couple of dozen people in there. But my goodness, how things changed. And I think they had 56,000 members eventually at the height of their fame. Those two young men from Manchester did very well. Other places like the Golden Torch at Tunstall too, and all of a sudden there were places to go at night. Burgeoning became quite a night spot in the potteries. And all of a sudden people were coming from Manchester and Birmingham for a night out in Stoke on Trent, which was absolutely unbelievable.
Well, the 60s for me was a really thrilling time for a simple reason. I was working really, you know, sort of 5, even 7 nights a week with local bands as a musician, you know, with my own group, Lonnie's Few, Peter and the Persuaders, and of course the famous Coleman and the Candymen, and even odd stints with Screaming Lord Such. You know, absolutely fantastic times, you know, and loads of people were out. There was a venue round the corner virtually from all your pubs and your town hall gigs at the weekend, and of course the middle venues like your Clayton Lodge, say, on a Sunday, or Embassy Club, Burslem, a Cameo, of course, at Longton, and your Crystal as was, you know, absolutely terrific times. Well, when groups came in from Liverpool or even Birmingham, Manchester, that's the sort of hub, the closest big towns to us, we would hold our own as local musicians, you know. When you think of the other groups, Vince Everett and the Black Orchids, of course, the Marauders, who actually dented the lower half of the charts in the sort of mid-60s, the Wombats, the Changing Times, Ricky Ford, of course, and the Tennesseans, Lance Harvey and the Kingpins, all these were really good musicians, and most of them had got little budding songwriters within the groups. Yeah. Well, my greatest hit, which I still perform to this day, is Wineglass Rock. Nothing tops Wineglass Rock. It's still my little anthem, and I can't go anywhere without the audience want me to play that. Before we've even set the gear up virtually, say, Wineglass, I can do it, and it's there, you know, yeah. So that is my little hit.
Brothers, you must follow the noble example of the Chartists of Yorkshire and Lancashire and arm yourselves for a struggle. For the day is coming when there will be a great struggle for your political rights. The time is coming when we must make the laws ourselves, for the tyrants are deaf to our cries and petitions and make damnable laws to starve the working class to death. Brothers, I was once in charge of a steam engine, and while I was away on business, the lad tending it weighted the steam clack to make it draw better, so that when I got it back, it was drawing so fast that the machine shook on its bearings, and I was afeard to touch it lest it might burst. Well, my friends, the oppressive weight of taxation and tyrannical laws on the poor of this country is so great that if the evil be not dealt with soon, their misery will burst forth and wreak havoc in this land of ours. I say to you again, to your tents, O Israel. And the meaning of that is, to be ready in your own houses. Are you ready, brothers? Are you sure you are ready?
You make artistic sense of the life and history of the area around you. And we hit on this idea, I suppose I hit on this idea of a documentary treatment of that. And the first one we did was the Jolly Potters in 1964, about the Chartist riots. And then we did one about the Civil War, the Staffordshire rebels in 1965. And in 1966, The Knotty, which dealt with the local railway. The story of the North Staffordshire Railway, affectionately known as the Knotty, was essentially the story of the rise of industry from the beginnings of the railway in the 1840s to its amalgamation with the London, Midland and Scottish Railway in 1923, and the beginnings of national trade unionism and its conflict with great national corporations and so on. So it was a very interesting industrial history. It was like the story of modern life, if you like.
One thing I personally remember from the 60s, being the grandson of a knotty man, was the end of the steam railway era in the 1960s. 1964, I think the last train ran on the loop line, the Potteries loop line, and steam trains then vanished from the scene.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it closed very early in the 60s. I can't say exactly when, you know. But of course, the time had come when low transport, motor transport, obviously was a very, very serious competitor, and that was the cause of it, you see. And I'm wondering now, I've been for a long time, whether it wouldn't have been better if we'd have kept the railway and utilised the space that we got there to relieve it on the roads, because that's what it'll come to. Well, I think so anyway.
Well, I think one of the remarkable things about the loop line was and it's rather ironical we should be talking about this today because of the number of mines that there were up there and the coal that came out. I mean, we got the Sneed Colliery and we got the Deep Pit Colliery, and then of course right bordering on the loop line itself was Chatterley Whitfield itself. So it meant that here you had a line that with a terrific amount of gradients on, extremely difficult to work trains up and down. And there was a lot of areas of the loop line as well as the gradient itself, the speed restrictions that were on the line. You know, I mean, just close to the Deep Pit siding between there and Hanley, you had a place called York Street, right against Century Hall as it is now, and going around that gradient around there, for example, was 15 miles an hour. Now, believe me, we got no speedometer on the train. And the type of trains that we worked, particularly on the freight side, you would never have worked your train if you'd retained 15 miles an hour. You'd got to let it go much faster than that. So, yes, it was gradients up and down all the way across the loop line itself. An area which meant that there'd got to be an amount of expertise, particularly from the driver, to work a train up and down there. Because in those days that we're talking about, the only brake that you got was on your engine, and plus the handbrake that was in the guard's van itself. So freight trains, there was no vacuum brake of any kind. And to work trains, and sometimes, you know, as many as 1,000 tons of coal you'd have on a train, and to work that train with just your driver's brake, you know, it was a very, very difficult and complicated procedure to do with. Fortunately, there was never any real bad accidents in there. And I put that down to the ability of the drivers on those particular trains.
When you think you could run from, say, Blythe Bridge to Tunstall, because all loop line trains didn't go through to Kids Grove, some of them terminated at Tunstall, you see. Some of them, of course, it was still known as a loop line, but they extended from Uttoxeter to even to Congleton, but it was there. But when you think about when you could run into Tunstall, quite frankly, you weren't supposed to do this, but we did it. You used to be on the steps of the engine. As soon as the train stopped, we were in between, hook the vacuum pipes off, steam heaters if you in the winter months, steam heaters, vacuum pipes, shackle, that's the coupling one of course, and round, wait for your driver to go the top points at Tunstall, go round on his own, which he shouldn't have done, and then come across and hook on, and you could do it all in about 6 or 7 minutes, you know. And well, you used to never think anything about it. It was done, you see. That's how we worked, you see. We provided what I think a good service, very good service indeed.
To a railway man and to the potteries as a whole, I think it was exceptionally important because it meant, of course, and we're talking about the time when very few people had got their own form of transport, and the number of stations that you'd got from Etruria. I mean, you went up, you came to Hanley, you then went round the corner, you came to York Street, you go a little bit farther up, you come to Cowbridge, from there you go to Burgeoning, from there to Tunstall, from Tunstall to Pittsell, from Pittsell down to Kedgegrove, and 2 stations at Kedgegrove. So you got all of those stations in there where the passengers would be arriving and getting on the trains. And of course it took you right through to Manchester that particular way. A stopping train from Stoke, for example, to Manchester in those days, stopping at every station, going across the loop line, would be the biggest part of 2 hours.
Well, I think it was the lifeblood of the really speaking, it was the lifeblood of the North Staffordshire Railway.
There is work for all who are willing to move elsewhere. In North Staffordshire, for example, we have enormous reserves of coal. 40 seams of it, more than 2 foot thick. Over 40 tons of it beneath each square yard of the valley in which Stoke-on-Trent and the other towns of the potteries lie. To increase production, it must have 500 more men on the coalface this year. Most of them will come from Durham under the Miners' Transfer Scheme.
Now take a look at the area and its 13 pits. Woolstanton, a modern concentration of 3 pits. Hemmeath, a £10 million development. And Florence, and the rest of them, all lying in the valley in the midst of the other industries and life of the 6 towns of the potteries. No isolated mining villages. You're in the town with the potmakers and the rest of them. Arnold Bennett said of it, out of the partnership of white clay and the black coal to fire it, we produce pottery that serves and pleases the world well. And though the old bottled kilns are no longer in use, pottery and coal are still the real business of the place. You'll get used to this town life. In time, you'll even learn where one of the 6 towns ends and the next one begins. And one day, you'll be shouting, up the Vale, up the Potters. But at first, you'll be strangers, away from the family, living in digs without any real contact with the place. You'll be bored and wonder why you ever came here. Difficulties about the new job may worry you. You'll say, it's not how we did it in Durham. But with your family around you, I'm sure it won't. And your children will grow up familiar with the names Norton, Hemmeath, Woolstanton and Florence and Chatley Whitfield, where you're going now to sign on.
Silverdale is situated on one of the richest mineral deposits in the world. Over 40 seams of coal and ironstone are found in the western part of the North Staffordshire coalfield, many of them mined in the Silverdale area.
In the Leased colliery, I worked in the different seams, in the moss, the 4 foot and the 5 foot, which was reckoned to be the best coals there was, eating coals anyway, in the country. And then there was the Bullhurst, and at the Many I worked in the rears a bit, and the 10 foot.
The almost vertical rearer seams were the most difficult in the coalfield, and mining of them was a craft to which the men of this area were famous.
Well, in the rears at the Many pit, you had to go up a ladder, I should think about 40 yards, and when you got to the top, there'd be a level that had been started in, a drift level, and the man would be working his coal along, so far along, on this level and keep readying it back, and then it would be ready back so he could throw it down the chute that was put aside of the ladder, do you see. And then when it got so far along, too far, they'd start again and start up again, do you see, and start putting the ladders up, then to form another level off.
Today, about 750 men work in the last remaining mine in the area, Kent's Lane. Many of them were born on Silverdale and have been miners all their lives.
I started to work in the pit bottom, coupling up the wagons. That was a boy's job in them days. And then when I'd served my apprenticeship, I went into the workings. And I used to assist the datelers or the colliers, bringing and fetching things for them. Eventually, at 19, I wanted some extra wages, so I started to load. And at 21, I started as a collier. And then I was in the money. I used to get about £3 a week. A little fortune in them days. Then I went to work at Aldwych Colliery. I worked there for another 21 years before I finished work altogether with that complaint, pneumoconiosis. You're short of breath with that complaint.
You arrive at the pit probably half an hour or 3/4 of an hour before you're due to ride, and get your dirty clobber on and up to the lamp house, draw your checks, your lamp, and have 5 or 6 minutes probably standing in the sunshine having a last fag of the smoke or talking about what's gone on the day before or anything like that. Then you make your way to the top of the pit. You get in the cage, shoved in. Some people say it's like cattle game, shoved in and dropped down the hill, and that's it. 7 1/4 hours. Away you go. Darkness, daylight, sunshine, rain, and nothing comes in the same. Everything just one black, same atmosphere all the way.
One thing about the miner is when he gets down the pit, he's got nowhere to have his snapping. He has to sit down on the floor. He doesn't have any tea, just water. Got no canteen facilities, no lavatories, nothing.
I haven't seen another workman work for 7 1/4 hours on his hands and knees in a confined space like these miners do. And I think they're the best set of men in the country to work with.
When you hear on the television and the radio that it's all mechanisation, with the mechanisation we've got in mining today, the miner's task is still a hard one. He's got to work for his pittance, which is what it is for the type of work he does.
When you've finished the shift, you've just got off the loco at pit bottom, you're standing there waiting with all the other men, thinking what you're going to do when you get up the pit. Have a shower, straight in the pub, have a pint, or go straight home, sit down, read the paper. It's beautiful, lovely.
You're coming up in the cage and you're wondering what's the weather like, because you don't know. For all as you know, it could be throwing it down. The weather's no different down the pit. Never any difference.
When you come up, if you're on days, bog-eyed shift, you come out and you see that sunshine. It's a great feeling when you get back on the bank.
You come out of the cage and you see the other poor buggers just going down and you think, thank God I've done.
Same as pit life, I think it's amazing really, because of the different people as you've got in the pit. You've got all sorts. You have Geordies, you have Staffies, and you have Poles, you have Ukrainians, you have all the lot, anything you can think of. And they all mix as one happy family. You know, if the world is the same place as the pit, as far as mixing with foreigners and this, that and the other, it'd be a far better bloody place than what it is now.
Sleep secure, no sleep so sweet as thine, no rest so
players gathered at the Stoke City football ground in England to play in a farewell game for the greatest player of them all, Sir Stanley Matthews. This is the last appearance of Sir Stanley at the club ground where he first played 33 years ago. He's still able to delight the crowd with a show of the old magic. In goal for the internationals was Lev Yashin, the Russian goalkeeper. The British team included such fine players as Greaves and Haynes. For the record, the international team won 6-4, but the result was secondary to the unprecedented tribute being paid to the man whose name is known wherever football is played. Sir Stanley Matthews was carried shoulder high off the field.
And it really was a tremendous game. 6-4 at the end, and I think until the last 5 minutes it was 5-4, and the crowd was shouting for an equaliser, and in fact the last goal came at the wrong end as it happened, but the score didn't matter in the least. What mattered was this great night in honour of Stan, and at the end of it all, these great players hoisted him in the air and on their shoulders and carried him off into history. And there were a lot of tears that night, and I don't think anybody was ashamed of it.
Well, the market in the old days, it was a cross between an outdoor theatre and a market. If you wanted a good night's entertainment, especially towards closing time or when there'd been another pot or two of these stall holders, especially the crockery stalls, you were in for a real bit of sport. For the simple reason, if you didn't buy the stuff, they threw it at you or smashed it.
I remember once when an old black man used to come and bring his gig and was drawing teeth, and he drew them with his thumb and finger. He asked you to get up on his cart and he wouldn't hurt you, and I'm sure it was true and all, because I had one drawn by him.
The farmers used to lay their stuff on what we used to call the stones, that's on the flow, on the ground, and he used to make it in squares. Each stallholder had his allotted distance, and he used to put his stall out according to what distance he'd got. I worked on Newcastle Station as a lad, W.H. Smith & Sons bookstall, and I used to serve the trains. We used to have a train coming through from Market Drayton, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I got special customers to meet with papers and several things as they came through. And on Saturday nights, there's 2 specials that used to go out from Newcastle. You come into Newcastle and out of Newcastle. One was to Almrend, and the other one was Kiel Market Drayton. And you could not get on the platforms. That's how busy the trains were in them days. And you used to have the cattle trains used to come in Tuesdays and Wednesdays from Odnett and Market Drayton. They used to unload on the Brampton sidings of Newcastle, and they used to drive the pigs, sheep and cows on the main road from the Brampton here in Newcastle to Chesterton, and sort their own cattle out when they got there. On the main road. You couldn't do it today.
I thought it was an architectural beauty. The bricks and all the features of it were very pleasing.
Inside it was it's a thing of rarity. The architecture was very, very good indeed, and also the decorating of it.
Well, the municipal hall, I'm rather sorry to see it go, because it was a landmark of Newcastle. And I think it, from my point of view, it is a very historical. There was figures on the outside of it, and there was a nice statue in the entrance. I forget who the statue was to. Nice statue in there, and the entrance to the municipal hall was a lovely entrance up the staircase. Beautiful entrance. You couldn't wish for a nicer entrance.
And used to go so gentle, hadn't they?
Oh, yes.
Very gentle.
Used to have some lovely times.
Used lovely balls they were in municipal hall, with the long dresses and the, gloves and the vanity bags on the hands and all that, and taking them round with the men with the white gloves on. far before the dancing of today.
The 27th of May 1967 was the centenary of Bennett's birthday, and the city of Stoke-on-Trent celebrated it in real style. They really pulled out all the stops for once. The actual date of his birth fell on the Saturday, which was very lucky. On the day before, on the Friday, the city arranged, in conjunction with Kiel Extramural Department, a celebrity lecture given by no less a person than J.B. Priestley, which, you know, was quite a coup, I think, for Stoke. On the day itself, they started off in the morning with wreath-laying ceremonies, first at his birthplace, then at his grave, and then finally at this actual plaque. Then in the afternoon there was a grand civic opening in the museum of an Arnold Bennett exhibition with manuscripts, some of his paintings, all kinds of memorabilia. In the evening there was a celebratory dinner chaired by no less a person than John Wayne. The main speaker was Alan Sillitoe. Then the following day, the Sunday, there was a memorial service across at Swanbank Chapel, which was still standing at the time, and members of the Victoria Theatre took part in that and gave readings from his works, and his widow, Dorothy Cheston, came along with his daughter, and they chose the hymns. So altogether it was a really splendid occasion.
Well, in the first place, this film came about because of no recognition at all belonging to Baskerville. You went and asked in the 1960s anything about him and nobody knew. You even go to the library, nobody knew anything. You had to go to the central office and dig things out, you know, background stuff. And I thought, well, this is wrong. And I thought, well, I'll do something about it. I got my own films, you know. I thought, right, I'll go out and make a story about him and let people know through the story why it was that he got the VC, and at least it'll enable people to understand, because I say nobody knew. So I went about doing this, and I got people involved, no actors, all lads out the street, and hired all the uniforms and the weapons. I thought, it can be done, this can. So, okay, we set about doing it, and it took 3 years to make this film. 3 years of my life went into making this. And in the end, we not only made the film, which is a record and which was deserved, but it also achieved the recognition for Jack Baskerville from Burslem, in as much as we got a plaque in his honour in Burslem, which is still there today. That was what I thought was the most deserving thing about it, as long as the lad got some recognition, because he was only a lad, a potted lad when he finished, 21, gave his life, big stuff, action. He could have been alive today, but he was marvellous. And the thing was about it, the action itself in the film, how he won the VC, he got wounded, and he operated 2 guns, single-handed, went from one to another. The story, it's indescribable. I can only show it in pictures, really, to make you understand. But when it was done, when you think what happened, it's incredible, because the lad thought it out. He didn't have to go and lose his life, he thought it out. That's the main thing. Well, when you see the film, we've got Germans, tanks, we've got the whole bag of tricks, just as it's supposed to have happened. And when you think that Richard Attenborough made that film, A Bridge Too Far, and it cost £8 million to make that, I slogged my guts out, I'll tell you, for 3 years, and it cost me £800 to make mine. And when you think the amount of material I've got, okay, I didn't blow any bridges down or anything like that, but I nearly got blown down myself. The point was this: we accomplished what we set out to do, and that was to tell a story. I'm only an amateur. I mean, I haven't got all this stuff at my disposal. I had to scratch, scrape, borrow, beg, plea. I even joined the bloody army for 4 days. But I got some tanks, I got them in the end. I could only do what I could do. People would ask, well, how did we take it, where did we take it, etc. And believe me, most of it was shot in teen. Most of it was shot in teen. It sounds incredible, but it was. And we went into a location which has been used many times since by the TV people, Hounds of the Baskervilles, all this, Heath House, and they were most cooperative there, and we shot it there. We shot everywhere. Could you imagine me though? I went to a scrapyard one day to get a wing off an aeroplane, and I dragged it myself. A wing, it must have been about 25 foot long. I dragged it myself up a hill, parked it there and painted and camouflaged it, and it was lying there for a week while I filmed it. Now I drag it back again. I'm glad we made it, because today, you couldn't make it today. You'd never get the permits, police permits, you wouldn't get the weapons, they wouldn't allow you to have them. I had a 6-pound anti-tank gun at teen. I was blowing things up, I was blowing folks up in fields with dynamite. I was nearly killing people. And I got no insurance, I couldn't afford insurance. I mean, when I wanted some men, one Saturday afternoon I was 2 men short, I went to the nearest pub in Creswell. And I got 2 coal men and they were black. I said, here, put these on. These parachute smocks, get these on. Do your stuff here, and they did it. Then they went back up the pint. That's my actors, no contracts. One interesting point was, folks have asked about where did I get the armour from? And we're talking about tracked vehicles, tanks. Where do we get them from? Well, I very politely wrote to the 16th Queen's Royal Lancers. They stationed on the Salisbury Plain. And I said to this officer, would it be all right if I could come down and take some photographs? Well, the next day, I had a letter saying, yes, certainly, can you come down on a certain date? I said, yeah. How many days do you want to be here? About 4 days I wanted, you see. He said, how many tanks do you want? How many men do you want? And I finished up, I had a squadron of tanks. And all these blokes, and they'd turn out every morning for me, chuck all the photographic gear on the tank, and away we went. And we pulled it off. And we were firing ammunition and rounds. Oh, God, it was costing about £10 every time they let one of these off. He said to me one day, don't stand there. I could see why when I stood there, when I was photographing it, when the shell went off, bang, all the leaves came off the trees. It's like a hurricane came past me. And my ears were ringing, I'll tell you. We've been dashing with death a good many times. But that's all part of the business, isn't it? It's all part of the business, this is.
Yeah, I suppose we've all got certain dates in history which we will always remember. And for me, March the 14th, 1968 will be one day I'll never forget. And that was the day that Radio Stoke went on the air, and Stoke on Trent had its very own radio station, which was a matter of astonishment, I think, to everybody concerned, even to the broadcasters themselves. They used to call us the station which had got more broadcasters than listeners in those days. It was probably true, because we were only on VHF. But that opening day was memorable, if only for the presence of John Snagg, a wonderful character, a man with a terrifically deep voice, who people will know from his boat race commentaries. But he was the man who started radio in Stoke-on-Trent back in the 1920s on 6ST. And then we got on with the broadcasting. And we broadcast for 4 hours that first day, and there wasn't a thing went wrong. The incredible thing was it went off without a hitch, that first 4 hours of broadcasting. The gods must have been on our side.
I think most people were taken by the message which was across reception in BBC Radio Stoke, which was called, of course, BBC Radio Stoke-on-Trent in those days. And the message read, your own folk on Radio Stoke. And I must say that I've always taken that as my sort of little motto. And I think, generally speaking, most people having a look at that said, yes, this is for us. And I suppose, really, when you think about it, it was a kind of emancipation by radio of ordinary folks. Of course, by then, not only had official staff been appointed and trained, but also there'd been lots of advertisements and contacts for local people to come in. And I was one of those. I was teaching then. And the idea was that I should, with my experience of work with tape and so on in schools, that I should actually provide a young person's program once a week, which is what I did, of course, for a huge fee. And then about 2 or 3 weeks after, it was doubled, and it was still nothing. And I think people got used to the idea of seeing people with tape recorders hanging from their shoulders and being accosted by microphones. And, well, you know, a fixture in the area, BBC Radio Stoke.
Well, it's not easy to say why one paints the potteries. I came to the potteries with a great dislike for it, and it took quite a long time before the atmosphere of the potteries took hold of me. But I think the things that really make it so attractive to a painter is the quality of the atmosphere and the unusual skyline, which is a feature of the hill towns which stretch out along this particular area. The features are, of course, the bottle ovens, now far fewer than they used to be, and they're so varied in shape and contour, and these, with the huddles of factories, particularly in the Longton area, give it a picturesque quality which I think you can find nowhere else in this country.
We were not going to move forward in any dramatic way until we had established a position for every child in Stoke-on-Trent to go to a school, a high school, which offered a full range of courses up to the age of 16. And we said, quite dogmatically, that we wanted a sixth form college, custom built, to make the sort of provision that we had in mind. And the raising the school leaving age not only meant that we had to have more places anyway, but it gave us a financial fillip, which enabled us, with the agreement of the Department of Education, to transfer monies from this particular area to the building of a new sixth form college, the first, I'm happy to say, and currently almost the most successful in the country. So I think that undoubtedly was the highlight of the 60s as far as education was concerned.
The burial tip was removed at the time of the opening of the sixth form college by Harold Wilson. Just before then, in the August before it was actually opened, during the Potter's holiday, then suddenly there was a transformation on that scene. And I've no doubt you've got some of the photos of it, you know, and seen that wonderful black and white atmosphere of the steam and all of the fumes rising from it. And what a remarkable thing it was for the people going away from the centenary on their holidays and coming back and saying, good God, what's happened to that big mound that was there? One of the fortunate cases where you've got a marl hole adjacent to it, you're able to take all the mound away and tip it in there. And I know that on the actual opening of the sixth form college, when we pointed it across, we got Arnold Wilson there, we explained to him what had happened there, showed him a photo of the man that was there and how quick it had disappeared. He said, quite remarkable.
I'll tell you a sight. There's one very ill. We took a heap and we put it into a hole. Marvellous job. In about 4 days they'd taken the ruddy lot and shoved it in. And it was really marvellous. They cocks full, half a dozen or so machines. But they were going down this rebel place, you know, sticking it over. It frightened me to death when I saw them operating 45 miles an hour, 50 miles a bloody hour. Rolling, rolling, rolling. That's what you can do when you've got a hole there and a heap there. Well, you've got much bigger things than that to do. But that proved that we could do it and do it very well.
We were devastated with the old pits, marl holes, holes dug all round the city, whether it was marl extraction or what have you. And the result was that we were living in the wilderness, dereliction everywhere from a scenic point of view. So we undertook the task of brightening the city up. We approached the government of the day and we got a grant aid on the basis that the population of the potteries of the city of Stoke-on-Trent were migrating, as they called it. And we were losing the age range of 15 to 44, which is the working age for people. And they are all disappearing into the outlying districts, and we had to do something to retain this. So we embarked on a program with 25% grant aid to eliminate these monstrous things that we were left with because of the Industrial Revolution. We attempted to eliminate the whole of the dereliction, which amounted to about 2,600 acres, so that it was a massive total. It was more dereliction in the city than there was in any other corresponding city or town in Britain. The thing about reclaiming land, we had quite a number of objectives. Mainly it's industry, housing, open space. To see these massive caterpillar tractors eliminating mounds, levelling out ground, it was frightening, awesome to see and hear the noise that was going on. But the end result was perfection.
Well, if one thinks, about the end of the 60s themselves, by that time then the springboard was really and truly loaded, and we were moving forward at a pace which was really rather surprising in relation to it. We had the area at Fenton, where the old pit there, right over the top of Erin Cross, all of that part was recovered. Norton Ceramics, who were on the site there, they were involved in it also, so this was one of the very first times in the country, I believe, that there'd been this kind of partnership between local authority and industry in recovering an area. Westport Lake also came along. That came along because that had been given to the city in exchange for another piece of land called Rogerson's Meadow from the Shelton Iron and Steel. That came on and went forward. Anley Forest Park was going forward, actually almost completed by then, but not, of course, to the extent of the growth of trees and grass and all of that on. So this really was the springboard, and from there the city went forward hand over fist very quickly during the 70s in all of the various schemes that one can now see around.
Diversification of the economy. The feeling in my bones that the pits and the pots wouldn't last forever. So I think that in a way Stoke was reaching a watershed in the 60s, which revolved round doing something for the education and training of young people, and on the other hand trying to putting the footings of a new North Staffordshire economy.
I suppose one of the major cultural changes for the pottery industry during the 1960s was the predominance of mergers, takeovers, buyouts. There had been some in earlier decades, particularly with people like Lawley's and Alfred Clough. But in the 60s, a whole bandwagon seems to start to roll, and we end up with large conglomerates, particularly dominated by the Wedgwood Group and the Royal Doulton Group. Those two companies own between them probably 50 trade names, and most of those names have now disappeared. And that's one of the big disappointments, I suppose, of what happened to these mergers, that the good old faithful names have now gone. Names like Shelley, no longer available to the industry because they became part of these large conglomerates.
Of the 60s is the beat boom, right? And measuring ourselves with, say, Liverpool. And like I say, we could hold our own with those groups. In fact, we had shows as good as what they put on at Liverpool. I mean, particularly was the King's Hall with the mod balls, where we'd have perhaps 7 or 8 bands on in one night, which is really something. And of course, when we talk of a lot of artists on one bill, I suppose the package tours, that was a main thing, you know, where you get a lot of entertainment for sort of a relatively low price and actually coming to your city. Whereas now, the acts that are around, the big names, which are still the big names, your Diana Rosses and Elton Johns, Phil Collinses, they don't come to the town now. They actually say, you come to us, and they play at the NEC Birmingham or your Manchester Apollos, the really big venues, your Wembleys and that. And of course, local people have got to sort of get the transport money, ticket money, and they don't go to a concert that often as they used to do in the 60s. So the entertainment value was far, far better.
Is this coming down to Cobridge then? It isn't it? Cobridge.
Is that Cobridge Road now? That's Cheltenham Construction Department on the left.
Yeah.
Used to be.
There's
and there's Shelton Works.
Yeah.
That's the blast furnace area and coking plant. The old works. Which is very tightly put together, wasn't it? Yeah.
And that's the new.
And there's the North Works.
There's our eating furnaces.
There's the furnaces, yeah. Furnace Bay.
Towers.
Entrance from Newport Lane. Coming into the Weybridge.
Yeah.
Not been used for many years, that entrance.
Mind, it did cause chaos in Middleport.
It was the main entrance for lorries. But they, when they made the A53 into a dual carriageway, they put a special exit in for Shelton, and we closed that end. There's the old Hilton Hotel, we used to call it. That was the amenity block for the North Works, for the Caldo and Mill. There's the Caldo. That's the hood going in. See the hood going into the vessel. They start blowing. Oh, you can't see it blowing oxygen. It's gone. We're back on.
That's casting.
Concast, yeah. That wasn't a bad shot of the Caldo though. The hood going in. And you can see right along the casting floor there. Continuous casting plant. That was very high up from the ground. What about? The plant was about 100 feet. Oh, Caldo again. They're pouring the pig iron into the Caldo. Now they're putting scrap in.
I should show you this rotating then, shouldn't you?
It might. I can't remember. That's scrap going in. So that's not a bad sequence. Scrap car.
I mean, it should show you, yeah, there's the rotation. Because that's what made it unique, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
It actually turned, trundled around, made a hell of a noise. And there's the hood coming out. You see the oxygen lance there, look. Now they're putting in additions. Quite what they're putting in, I'm not sure now. Ray. Depending on the analysis, that they could add stuff like limestone, carbon.
Well, where did they actually kill the steel?
In the ladle.
In the ladle?
Yeah, because they put manganese in and so on in the ladle, finally. Now that's the lid going on to a ladle full of steel. The hole in the top was for a burner to keep it warm, although it wasn't always used. It's securing the lid. And it's on a sort of trolley, a huge trolley. You can see it moving now. And it went across the ladle bay and to the bottom of a shaft, which must have been 50 feet. And the crane on the casting floor dropped down the shaft, picked up the ladle and took it right up to the casting floor. And you can see it going now. And it's appearing at the other end. That's the top.
So it's gone up about 50 feet there.
Yes.
From the bottom of the shaft.
I mean, the building was about 100 feet tall, so it may be more than 50 feet. Probably was. It was a hell of a building. So there's the ladle now being placed in the cradle. Carefully. Some accurate crane driving needed. That's the burner. He's now taking a temperature, and they used to allow it to cool if it was more than about 1585 degrees centigrade. It used to come up sometimes at 1600, maybe 1610, and they used to let it cool down to about 1585, and they'd take temperature until it was correct. Now it's tilting, as you can see, on that cradle, and the steel's being poured into a brick-lined or refractory-lined tun dish. That's the control room. He's tilting the ladle.
Each department has got its own colour, hasn't it, for these safety helmets?
Safety helmets, yeah.
The red ones for the casting plant.
You can see the steel coming out now into the tun dish. When the tun dish is full, those guys at the bottom there are 3 streams of metal coming out of the tun dish, and they could control the rate of flow with those handles. There was a refractory stopper in the bottom of the tun dish, and he could control the rate as it came into the mould there. You can see the mould. You can see the mould reciprocating up and down, and that's a reciprocating mechanism, hydraulic mechanism. That's the floor below. It was a multi-floor building. Can't remember how many floors, but there were a lot. By the time you climbed the stairs, you knew about it. Quite while they're showing that, you see fans, hydraulic systems. That's the ladle ram that tilts the ladle. Can't quite see what that is yet.
Well, that's the sprays, isn't it? It's where they spray.
Oh, it's a spray chamber.
Yeah, spray chamber.
The doors are normally closed. You normally wouldn't get that view. There's a chamber that's encased in a steel surround, and you can see the little rollers there and the hot bar coming down between the rollers, and in between each roller there's a spray nozzle. Look, you see the water spraying on the steel shell, because at that point it's still molten inside. If you didn't get that right, the steel could break out, and you'd have a flood of steel in the spray chamber, and it would do enormous damage. He's taking off. That's the dummy. They call that dummy bar. That's in the bottom of the mould when they start pouring.
They're bending it now.
Now he's bending the hot bar as it comes down.
That's cut into line.
Yeah. Now he's cutting it. They're cutters. So they cut lengths of bar from it, which were then termed as blooms, which went into the furnace in the mill for rolling. There's the 3 streams having been bent. You can see them going right up into the plant. They'd be solid there, of course, completely solid. And that's where they cut oxypropane.
And cutter operators.
Cutter operators there, yeah. Oxypropane cutters.
And they go to cool before going to be put in the bloom stocking area, bloom bay.
They go into a cooling bank. I think it might show that. They're getting quite cold there. It's cut. Separate, hopefully. Another one being cut here.
Yeah, them cutters used to move along at the same speed of the.
That's right.
As the bar was being discharged, as the bloom was being discharged.
So as the whole thing was moving along, as Harry said, the cutters clamped to it and moved along with it. There's the blooms, and the cast number going on. And they'd stay there now until they were cold enough to pick up by a magnetic crane. Anything above about 600 centigrade, if my memory's right, the magnetic crane wouldn't pick them up. There's a change in internal structure.
Size, different size.
Different sizes, yeah. Yeah, different casts. And that's in the bloom bay. Now that's behind the furnaces. Is it? Oh, it's still on rails there. No, it's not. It's cooling. They're on top of each other. They just store them like that. Is that the bloom bay?
Yeah, that's
the bloom bay. That's furnace. You can just briefly glimpse a bar coming out the furnace. So there's the bloom, having been reheated.
First, that's the breakdown stand. First pass. Usually a sequence of either 11 or 13 passes now for the piece to become a beam blank and transferred to the next mill. This was a terrific job to operate this breakdown stand. A really skillful operator. And it's passing on to the main stand.
The universal mill now. That's
a saws sequence, yeah.
Saws again. It's jumped. Finished product.
Stacking area. And for dispatch. Transport lengths were good though, weren't they? You know, for rail and road.
Yeah, yes, no doubt. Miles and miles and miles of section.
Angles.
New Orleans, that one. Up to New Orleans. We worked out once that we'd rolled enough in a week, I think it was a week, to reach from Shelton Bar down to Grosvenor Place in London.